Hello and welcome to our webinar, Process Automation with Dynamo. This webinar is brought to you by Applied Software. My name is Caitlin Dunn and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. We encourage you to take advantage of our fully customizable webinar console by clicking on the icons at the bottom of your screen. You can resize any of these widgets during the presentation. Click the Help widget if you need assistance. Then you have the Slides widget that contains the PowerPoint used for today's presentation. The media player allows you to control the volume. After that, you have the Q&A widget where you can type in questions and comments throughout the presentation. We'll take time to answer questions at the end of today's webinar. We're excited to connect with you further. Please take a moment to introduce yourself. For other questions or comments, or to request more information, click on the next widget to send us an email. Next is the Facebook widget. Like our page to catch up on the latest trends, training opportunities, and much more. You can take the survey at any time during or after the webinar. The resource widget contains links to check out our free webinar library and register for upcoming webinars. This webinar is being recorded for your convenience. You'll be receiving an email with the recording link for future reference. Find Applied Software on social media to make meaningful connections, receive special offers, and stay up to date on the newest innovations. And be sure to visit our website, ASTI.com, to see how to achieve your design and business objectives through our innovative solutions, training options, and services. Click the link in the resource widget to register for our upcoming webinars and view previously recorded webinars on demand. You can also find a complete schedule of upcoming events, webinars, and trainings on our calendar at ASTI.com/calendar. I'm pleased to introduce Anthony Zuefeldt. Anthony is an enterprise and solution architect at Applied Software. Thank you for joining us today, Anthony. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It's really great to be here, and I'm really excited to kind of show you some of the stuff that I've been working on recently. So just a quick background on myself at Applied Software. I do a lot of things, but probably the favorite thing that I do is custom Dynamo solutions. And we'll get into this as I kind of jump in here, but I am a huge Dynamo fan, and I really believe that it's continuing to grow as an application. It has a lot of potential to improve our industry, from AEC to manufacturing, fabrication, everything in between. So, Caitlin, I was wondering if we could pose that Dynamo question. So, did you want to put that poll up there?
Yep.
So
all right.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask, but are you using Dynamo today? I wanted to just get a sense of the room and kind of hear, is your firm using Dynamo? Is this something that you're looking at getting into? Is that why you're here? Or are you using it and you're just really curious to see what other people are doing?
We'll give everyone a few seconds, and then I'll head over to the poll results.
Oh, I like it. I get to see the live votes coming in. Nice. Oh, we're starting to skew.
Yeah, I see about 64% of our attendees have answered. Do you want to go ahead and go to the poll results?
Yeah, let's go ahead. I think we've got a good sense of what the room is at. So it looks like the majority of you are not using Dynamo today. And I think that's interesting. I think that I have a charge to you that after today's presentation, that maybe you take this curiosity of attending and you go back to your office. You say, maybe Dynamo can be a game changer for us, right? So this is good to know. I definitely am not going to get super technical with a bunch of the programming concepts behind Dynamo. We'll keep it high level so that everyone can kind of benefit from this webinar. But that's an interesting statistic, which kind of leads to the second poll question, which is really only going to be applicable to the 43% of you that are using Dynamo. But I want to ask, if your firm is using Dynamo and you're familiar with it, you would know that there are Dynamo versions. And maybe I should have put another question option on here, but if you know what version your firm is using, do you want to mark that? So, Caitlin, would you be able to post up the second poll?
Absolutely.
And the reason why I'm asking about the Dynamo version is it really goes back to the tagline when I was kind of putting together the idea for this webinar, which is Dynamo as an application is extremely agile. And it's rapidly evolving as a consequence. Between today and a year ago, the amount of change, the amount of improvements that Dynamo has experienced is unbelievable, and it's amazing to see. So as you answer this question, you could find that if you're using a 2.0 or older Dynamo, there's some serious implications for upgrading. And for anyone that's thinking about Dynamo, what you should really be excited about is that Autodesk and its team is putting together a lot of energy to make this application into something special. So I see the votes kind of rolling in. We're getting an interesting mix.
All right, whenever you're ready, I can go to the results.
Let's do it.
All right.
Okay, so I see the majority of you are in 2.0 or older, and that is, frankly, that's what I would expect. And just let's keep this in mind that the current version of Dynamo in Revit is 2.6. The latest version of Dynamo is actually 2.10. And with the next release of Revit, we're probably going to see a 3.0 release. So exciting stuff. I think this should really set the stage nicely for kind of talking about process automation with Dynamo. So Caitlin, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And can you just confirm once I've got this up?
Sure thing.
That you see, take it just a second, and there we go. Just let me know when you see Dynamo.
You got it. I see Dynamo.
Okay, perfect. So this is a false flag. I'm not actually going to be doing anything in Dynamo today, but I figured maybe I'll just start by showing anybody that's never been in Dynamo. This is kind of what it looks like as an application. And again, what does Dynamo do? It's an integration, a visual programming integration that can connect with applications like Civil 3D, Advanced Steel, and most famously Revit. But it connects with a lot more than just those applications. So I'm going to start sharing my PowerPoint here. And here's the subject for today. The subject is process automation. And process automation with Dynamo is a pretty big topic, and it has a lot of interesting applications. So what is process automation? Let's just state this first to make sure that we're on the same page. But process automation is the use of technology to execute recurring tasks or processes in a business. And this is something that I think about my day-to-day all the time, is how can we be more efficient? How can we get our design team away from doing these redundant tasks? How can we get them away from manually entering data? And Dynamo is an engine that allows us to tap into this process automation in a way that, frankly, the industry's never been able to take advantage of before to the level that we can with Dynamo. I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects that I've done in the last year. And these 3 projects are a template formulator, an equipment layouts tool, and a family automation tool. Now, the template formulator, just a quick synopsis, is a tool that essentially allows you to configure your Revit template, your base template, and tailor it to the project type that you're working on. Now, the example that I built here was designed for an architecture firm, and I think it probably, as a tool and a concept, speaks more to an architecture firm than really any other discipline. The equipment layouts is a really fun project that I did with a customer. It was an R&D project where we were testing out the viability of Revit's generative design tool that was added in Revit 2021. And how can we use that to optimize equipment layouts for a refinery? And the last thing is a project that I just wrapped up, honestly, last week. Had some revisions last week I had to make, but it's a family automation tool. And so a company has a giant product catalog with thousands of products, and they needed to take them into Revit. And we built a Dynamo-powered tool to automate the creation of all the content in Revit. So let's talk about the template formulator first. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you kind of a high-level overview of each of these tools. And then once I've run through each of these tools, I want to kind of talk about where I see Dynamo is going. So give you a tour, and then kind of talk about the future focus, as well as recent developments. And then from there, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have in the audience. So this template formulator tool, again, the base concept here is that we wanted to build a tool that could configure a Revit template that was essentially an empty Revit file. And we called it a seed template. And we would configure it to the specific project type. And to see what this looked like, the first thing that you should understand when we talk about Dynamo is that you do not need your tools to have everyone Dynamo proficient. And in fact, all 3 of these tools that we're looking at today use custom UIs to make it so that you will not have to have anyone ever open Dynamo, right? They can do this all from Revit in the Dynamo player or some button built into Revit to activate this. So this custom UI, essentially what happens is we launch the Dynamo graph and it pops up this UI. It's powered by Data Shapes, which is a phenomenal extension for Dynamo. And in here, the end user is able to specify their design group. The customer was Scott & Sudik. They're an architecture firm up here in Denver, where I'm based out of. And essentially, they have 3 design studios. And each design studio had very different design requirements between residential single family to getting into the multifamily group in particular. So by launching this, we're able to kind of configure and allow the end user to simply specify their design group, and then it will allow them to further customize what goes into their project, as well as an Excel file path, which I'll talk about in a second. So all of this stuff they can customize, and the idea is that by the time they start their project, a lot of stuff will be configured and tailored to their project. One of the interesting things that this allowed us to do is it allowed us to shift project management out of Revit and into Excel so that we could have, a pretty powerful Excel document where the project managers could simply come in here and define things like the building code years, specific requirements, level elevations, things of that nature, and then automatically extract this data and use it to configure the Revit project. So the big idea here is that Excel can become a really powerful extension for Dynamo and Revit. Another thing that the Formulator did is that we built a container file that every family, every piece of content that they had in their library, we actually were able to extract selectively content per project type. And how it worked was we essentially had different views, and based on the building type that you specified, it would bring in any of the content that was placed inside of that view. So I put a bunch of walls, a bunch of furniture families, a bunch of doors, whatever it looks like, and only the content related to that project type comes into your project. And probably the most impactful part of all this is that this formulator allowed the end user to come in with a completely set up project in terms of views, sheets, and views on sheets. So they set up a 4-story multiplex building, and in there, it would create a sheet set that exactly represented the amount of buildings, the amount of stories, and then all the views would be placed perfectly on the sheets. And then the last thing that this tool had that I thought was pretty interesting is that we were able to integrate code year management. So again, this kind of talks more to the architect than anybody, but the idea is that we can manipulate the content within our templates to be code compliant, right? We can drive parameters, we can purge and create and place views, all related to specific code diagrams and other things of that nature. So the last thing that I'll say to this template formulator tool is kind of talking about the ROI. So the tool itself was something that we were looking at trying to get about 6 to 10 hours of project setup time back from the end user and kind of automate it. So these are all pretty mundane tasks, right? These things, setting up views, creating levels, placing the views on sheets, that's not necessarily sexy stuff that you want to do as a designer. And this automation tool, what it allowed us to do is take all of those mundane, repetitive project start tasks, automate them. And we were able to achieve about 6 hours of time saved per project, every project that the firm does when they run this tool. Now, the second thing here that we had was this generative design equipment layouts tool. And this thing did leverage Revit's new generative design tool, and it was really intended to be a proof of concept. And I learned a lot of really interesting stuff. But essentially, to talk about generative design as a concept, what we're talking about here is the ability to iterate over many hundreds of or thousands or even more iterations of a design for a specific set of conditions. And then this example here is from Matter Lab. But what they're doing is they're taking a site and they're testing many different forms for this building and determining, the optimal configuration for a various inputs, if you will. So with this idea in mind, what we did is we wanted to build a tool that could evaluate equipment and see how to most efficiently lay it out in the most compact manner while also having the most processing capacity. So the conceptual framework for this tool was essentially that we needed to be able to generate equipment in various layouts, analyze those layouts. We would then rank the layouts, right? So I have a layout A, a layout B, and a layout C. And as we evaluate based on certain objectives, we're able to rank them. And as we rank them, we're able to iterate further and continue to evolve. So we saw that layout A for this equipment set was a little bit better. It met more of the criteria that we're trying to achieve. It had more processing capacity, and it took up less square footage. So that's good. So it continues to evolve, and we continue to look at this. And ultimately, we're able to then explore this and then select an option and integrate it into the Revit project. So here's how this really worked at a more technical level. This tool actually used Plant 3D to run. So here's another thing that we want to think about that I alluded to earlier. Dynamo doesn't just connect with Revit or AutoCAD, Civil 3D, that's what it's known for. But the reality is that if a program has an API, we can probably connect to it in some form or fashion. We might have to build the bridge to make that connection, but we can connect to it with not much effort either. So in this example, what we did is I actually collaborated with the Applied Software Plant 3D team, Owen Whitehouse and David Wolf, and we set up a data set inside of Plant 3D, and it had a database of equipment, and the equipment contained a lot of parameters, a lot of data that we wanted to pull into Dynamo to begin driving geometry and decisions around placing the geometry. So we built a relay that essentially took out a SQLite database and used this SQLite information to drive Dynamo, and specifically to help configure that refinery layout. So once we kind of built this thing in Dynamo, one thing to understand about the generative design tool inside of Revit is that it is powered by Dynamo. And what you do is you export a Dynamo study, and these studies are specifically intended to run inside this tool. And so once you create your study, you're then able to export it out into the generative design tool, and you can begin to have it evaluate different outcomes. This specific study was focused on generating the floor plate for the layout. So this was actually a multi-layer generative design solution. And this one example that we're looking at here was specifically concerned with generating that floor plate. Some interesting things, if you guys are interested in generative design as a concept, how did we kind of accomplish this? Well, what we did is we tried to interpolate the equipment data into an optimal footprint for the building. And the Dynamo logic was driven largely by two methods. We used a bin packing method, which is much like what Amazon or FedEx uses to load their delivery trucks, right? When they have a delivery, a bunch of boxes, they all pack into their truck in the most efficient method. So bin packing was one concept that we used. Now, the challenge is that we also needed not only to just cram all the equipment into a floor space as tightly as it could be with clearances, but we also needed to build relationships to specific equipment, right? Maybe one processing equipment piece needs to be closer to another rather than 100 feet away from each other with a bunch of stuff stacked in between it. So we also used attractor points, which is, if I were to actually go back up here, kind of what you see right here. This idea that we can have relationships between points and there's gravity to those points. So points that share similar traits will try to cluster together. And so we use this essentially to help formulate relationships of positional relationships for the equipment. And ultimately, when we brought this into the Revit environment as a final product, this is really what it looked like, was essentially a very high level conceptual look at what this equipment layouts might look like. But again, it was a pretty fun concept because we were able to evaluate thousands of iterations in minutes and intelligently at that, right? We're able to optimize this and evaluate the best outcomes that the generative design solution could make. So to kind of recap here, this tool would take equipment data out of Plant 3D, bring it into Dynamo, and then begin to optimize a floor plate. Maybe you're not someone that is in, the plant or the refinery business, but the concepts that we see here are really interesting and super compelling to me because this is something that really anybody that is using prescriptive design work, whether you're an MEP contractor and maybe you need to have optimally placed returns and supplies, registers, those kind of things, these tools offer a ton of promise for producing solutions in that space. And I'm really excited to see what happens with this because this technology is brand new. I mean, it came out last year with Revit 21. And I think that as we continue to progress, we're going to see it continue to get more powerful and see people come up with increasingly creative solutions. Now, the last tool that I just finished is this product catalog automation tool. This tool, the concept was to build something that could help automate the creation of thousands of Revit families. And the idea here, jumping ahead, the idea here is that we had all this product data and we needed to convert it from just abstract data into real parametric Revit geometry that would flex and change based on this. And it basically worked by doing this. We built a series of seed families that could receive specific parameter data. And using this automation tool, we were able to create additional parameters, new family types based on that product data, and then in those family types, fill them with the respective product data. And again, in this example here, this one seed family is responsible for a catalog of over 800 families. And I run this thing, and something that probably would have taken a week to produce, it really took about 20 minutes between building the seed family and then running the automation tool. And so the final output was essentially, because this actually connects to a Forge application that we're currently building in the cloud, a Forge-based design tool. This was able to create all of the collateral that the Forge tool needs, including the Revit files. It also produced accessory text files that included additional product data that was required to run the Forge tool. SAT files for specific geometry representation, and then PNGs for thumbnails. So all of these different outputs can be automated using Dynamo. And I guess since we haven't really seen one of these yet, here's kind of what that final graph looked like for the equipment layouts that I just finished. So one thing that this leads to is a question of, with any of these, how much time does it take? How much effort does it take? And how hard is it? And what does it mean for Revit? And what does it mean for Dynamo and all of this? And the idea here is that we're building megagraphs. And it's an interesting concept. And, in some ways, there's people that push back and say, when you get to a certain size, it should be a completely custom code development in C# or Python or something, right? But it doesn't have to be, and it's increasingly becoming the case that it doesn't really need to be, because Dynamo keeps getting more and more powerful. I thought it was interesting, but this very morning I had one of my favorite follows in the Dynamo space, Keen Walmsley, who works for Autodesk. He just posted this really interesting COVID office occupancy Dynamo megagraph. And I really appreciate it because it gets into the same stuff we've been talking about. And it continues to highlight this idea that megagraphs are acceptable and megagraphs can perform just fine as a tool. Go pop back into my, oops, try that again. Okay, so popping back up into here, the idea is, what does this mean? Because if you're like a long-term Dynamo user, I've been using it pretty much since it was created, but there's some like fundamental truths about Dynamo that are starting to change. And one of them is, how much power does it have? How much can it do? And the answer is, it's quickly becoming able to do anything. And that's where I'd like to talk about how Dynamo is evolving. Because Dynamo is one of the fastest improving programs in the AEC space. It's got this really unique blend of open source, community development, and a dedicated dev team supported by Autodesk. And they're propelling these incredible improvements from year to year. I mean, just unbelievable. And this means something. This means something for all of us, that even from a year ago to now, our reality is changed, and there's new opportunities for automation. There's new automation tools coming out. There's new avenues for doing work. We don't have to work the way we've always worked. And so I want to talk about a couple of those recent changes. First of all, let's just talk about really quickly the Dynamo timeline here for releases. 2013, it's actually going on technically 8 years old, if not even technically a little older than that. But it was first conceived as a public release in 2013. Now, we don't really count those years. It's really around 2015 to 2016 that Dynamo enters the public consciousness as a viable automation solution. A lot of people, especially in those early days, were looking at Dynamo as a Rhino, Grasshopper, crazy geometry tool. As we've seen today, it can do all of that, but the stuff that I'm interested in is process automation. So 2020, in like May, April of last year, it's kind of weird to think that was last year, we had our Revit 21 release. And shortly after, we had a hotfix or something that put us on 21.1. And in there, we are able to access Dynamo 2.6. Since then, we've had a Dynamo 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, and currently we are on 2.10. And there's some huge, huge things that have happened in just the last couple of iterations that are not yet in Revit. 2.7, we migrated from Python 2.7 to Python 3. And that's a huge thing. Without getting into the technical details of why that's a big deal, what it means is that Dynamo's code language is now hanging out with modern Python code, which allows for some incredible libraries that are going to further expand our computational design abilities. This is the biggest thing on this list, if I'm being completely honest. But there's some other really interesting things that have happened, including this node autocomplete, which I'm going to talk about more in a couple of minutes. But this idea that we want to democratize access to visual programming and make it easier for people to do. And this node autocomplete is a big step in that direction. So here's another thing that we need to acknowledge, kind of talking about the mega graph concept. But if we were to break down and go back even like 2 years ago, a Dynamo graph that was maybe 1,000 nodes or something, which is pretty big, that's a big graph, it would take a bit to run. And in fact, that template formulator that I built, when I built the first release, it took 10 to 12 minutes to run because it was just doing so much, right? It was spinning up views, it was importing stuff. There was a lot happening, and it took a long time, and it felt like it was too long. So that sent me on a journey of exploring algorithmic efficiency, and I ended up refactoring the code base, which allowed us to get down to about a 3 to 5 minute runtime, depending on the machine, depending on the complexity of the project, which was huge, right? Just by just being smarter about how I built the graph and the data flow, we were able to get it much faster. But what was really interesting is that a couple of months after we released the tool to the firm, Revit 21 came out and Dynamo was released. And shortly after that, I'd heard that Dynamo 2.6 had radically improved its performance speed. And I thought, well, why not test it out on this template formulator tool? So I upgraded it into 2.6 and I ran it, and it was running in under a minute. So I didn't do anything besides just take something that 9 months ago, or I guess 10 months ago, took 3 to 5 minutes. And then in the newest version, now it runs in 1 minute. So performance gains are huge. And part of where this comes into play is that we have this ability to target specific nodes, not us so much, although we can use it too. But the Dynamo team has a new tool, and it's actually called the Tuneup tool. And what it does is it allows us to intelligently analyze the execution times of each node. And what we can do is we can find outliers in here, things that take a little bit longer than other nodes do. And what this means is that the Dynamo team is finding outlier nodes that take longer to run, and they're rewriting them, and they're making them faster. So to go back, to here, here we have in Dynamo 2.7, which isn't even out yet, 2 examples of nodes that were taking 36.4 seconds to run. Here we are in 2.9, which is already out of date. We're on 2.10. And it takes 0.9 seconds to run. So the execution times are starting to rapidly improve. And this is happening. This has happened in the last 9 months. Huge radical performance gains. And this is game changing because it opens up some real possibilities for big Dynamo solutions that can do grand things, that can automate a lot, right? Not just one thing, but many things. Many things, many ideas. Now, the last thing that I wanted to show you was this node Autocomplete, because this is something that represents a paradigm shift in the way we work in Dynamo. But the idea is that if you understand your end output, you understand what you want to make. In this example, you want to make an inscribed polygon. And you don't know how to make it in Dynamo. Well, this node Autocomplete, what you see happening here is we are going in, we're able to click on the inputs, and we're actually able to have it automatically give us compatible inputs. Now, it's not perfect today, but this is one of the prime objectives of Autodesk, is essentially to make Dynamo more accessible, right? So that I might not know what node needs to go into that number slider or whatever it is, but by right-clicking on the input, it will give me a selection that I know is going to be compatible. And essentially, it's auto-completing the graph for us. And ultimately, that means what? That means that even people that aren't Dynamo experts, Dynamo gods, gurus, whatever they want to call themselves, your larger office has a better chance of being able to build these things on their own. Dynamo is not necessarily an easy program to learn, right? It's a different way of thinking. But as these things start to mature and build out, I think more and more people will be able to take advantage of it. So, when we talk about the future of our industry and we talk about the next decade, I think Dynamo features prominently. It's a way to leverage process automation, right? And to make our firms, make our companies more profitable, more accurate, faster, and to get away from that mundane, repetitive task making, right? And get into leveraging our knowledge. So I'm a huge fan of Dynamo, and I hope that this presentation has really been interesting and has you thinking about maybe what's possible. So that's really all I've got. Caitlin, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, wonderful. Well, right now we have a few minutes to take questions. So if anybody has any questions, make sure to type it into the Q&A so we can answer that for you. And if you have a question, but you can't quite put it into words right now, you can contact Anthony or Applied Software at any time. Just take a look at those slides we saw previously, and you'll find the contact info there. All right, Anthony, I do see one question so far, and that is, what do you see coming to Dynamo in future updates?
That's a good question. So the Dynamo team has a kind of a roadmap. It's not quite like what you'd see with some of their other products. I like it better, actually, but they have a couple of really interesting initiatives going on, and probably the biggest one is they're continuing to build out the node Autocomplete. Some other interesting things that have happened, if you were to look at like Dynamo 2.6, for instance, there was a huge thing that happened. If you know Dynamo, packages are a huge part of how Dynamo works. And the package management has pretty much been completely automated. So when we look at kind of future Dynamo progression, I would expect to continue to see the package management get easier and more automated. They've been building out a much more powerful warning breakdown. So let's say you draw your graph and it doesn't work. And you're like, why didn't it work? Well, they have a much more robust warning system that explains why didn't it work. Well, you put in the wrong data. Here's really what you should have put in. I think that's super cool. And then, again, the Python migration to 3.0, I know there's more they're doing with that, and I think it'll be interesting to see what that means. But just in layman's terms, it means that Dynamo is going to continue to get more powerful and continue to just push our industry forward. I don't know if that answers it, but that's kind of maybe some of the things that I know is on the radar.
That's very helpful. We do have another question, which is how long did it take you to build these tools? And is this something that could be built by a moderately skilled Dynamo user?
I think that's a loaded question, but I like it because it's fair, right? Because, there's no question that when you get into these mega graphs, when you're talking about rather than 20 or 50 or even 100, you're starting to talk about multiple hundreds or more. There's a lot of data that you have to kind of manage, and sequencing of operations kind of becomes key. I would say it would depend on the complexity of the solution you're looking for and how resilient you want the graph to be. So one thing that's always important when we get into these office-wide deployments of tools is they need to be idiot-proof, right? They need to be so that you can give it to the toddler in the room and they're not going to break it. So you have to build in resilience factors to make sure that it's not going to do something impossible, if you will. That kind of stuff does require more advanced skills, but a lot of the conceptual framework can be done by anybody that is, relatively fluent in Dynamo. Not a beginner, but I do think an intermediate user can learn it. Now, as far as like the development time, I would say that all three of these graphs, between the project kickoff to release, it was about a month. But in that month, we were collecting the design requirements, and we also did training on the tool for the team. So I'd say it took about a month. Now, in terms of actual hours, that would be a little bit hard for me to give an estimate, but we did the whole thing in a month each.
Woohoo, very nice. We have one last question, then it looks like that's it. With these tools you built, how have you made them easier for non-Dynamo users to use without opening Dynamo?
Right. Yeah, I think that's huge because, a lot of what we're looking at here is extremely intimidating, right? If you were to tell someone that doesn't even know what Dynamo is, what does it mean that I'm looking at this? We shouldn't expect non-users to open Dynamo. And if you're building graphs that can't function without Dynamo being opened, and you want the whole office to use them, you should probably reconsider. My go-to strategy for building Office deployments is to get into custom UIs. There is a Dynamo package called Data Shapes, and in it, it includes a bunch of UI nodes. And these UI nodes allow us to essentially have dialog boxes pop up in Revit to control the Dynamo graph. You never open Dynamo. You simply run the Dynamo player. You hit play on the graph. It pops up the dialog box, and then from there, the user can drive the operation however they need. The dialog boxes are superior to just running in the Dynamo player because they allow for much more concise, much more legible control over variables and different options. So I think that would be my response.
Wonderful. All right. Since that's the last question, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah, thank you everybody so much for joining us today. We appreciate you spending your time with us, and we trust that it was meaningful and impactful for you and your business. We look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Thank you, Anthony. That was a wonderful presentation. You did a great job. See you all next webinar. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.